It is the 5th day of September 2023 and you're just in time for another edition of News Now. Well, you have so much lined up for you on our bulletin this afternoon. Remember, you can always interact with us on our social media handles indicated at the bottom of your screen. Now, with that said, my name is Dennis Otieno. I trust you're doing well. Welcome to the broadcast. Now on to our top story this afternoon. Kenyan businesses want continental governments to address the undersettling of continental carbon credit, saying the global north are leveraging on tech advancements to make more from the venture. Equity Chief Executive Officer James Mwangi says the government must incentivize the reduction of carbon footprint efforts by local firms to achieve net zero. He further notes advancing technological advancements in the green economy through tax rebates will be a game changer for the country. These sentiments were echoed by the president, who says global financial systems and regulations still lean in favor of the global north.
To look at the entire financial structure because carbon trading will be a product, proceeds of a product. What we didn't need is, before we get the product, we need to invest. And that is where the addressing the African credit risk is the beginning, is the genesis of structuring. The issue of looking at the rating of the African risk, the categorization, bring it to reality. Because essentially, when you look at financial systems, the lowest risk rating is which is asset-backed. Africa is backing its investments with its resources. So what the private sector is doing is to provide the frameworks of their experiences in accessing global finance.
Meanwhile, the Machakos County government is experiencing wrangles after Governor Wavinya Ndeti was accused of awarding contracts and job positions unfairly. Speaking at a public participation event in Mavoko, Ndeti has opposed the claims of some members of Machakos County that she has not been neutral in giving contracts and job opportunities in Machakos County. In a scenario witnessed this week, Ndeti's meeting was disrupted by angry citizens in a heated exchange of words between a county representative and Ndeti's supporters.
Hapa ni nyumbani. Tunaloana. Ile iko nataka tukae na amani. Na mimi nashangaa watu wengine wakiniambia napatia Wasomali kazi. Hapa hakuna Wasomali? Hapa siko Mjaluo, siko Mkikuyu, siko Mjaluo. Na watu wako wapi? Si wote ni wa Machakos County. Na siko Mkamba. Wajamani, nikipatiana kazi, si lazima ni balance. Hii siasa ya watu kusema, kwa sababu wao wamezoea kupatiwa kazi peke yao, na wengine hata waliambiwa na mkubwa yao. Maneno ya kuleta ukabila katika Machakos County, I am not interested and I'm not part of it.
Wengine walikuwa wanaomba nafasi ya kufanya kazi kwa serikali ya gavana. Gavana akaangalia CV zao na akaangalia historia yao kidogo, akaona ni watu wa vurugu na watu wa saa yote kuincite watu. Wacha kutumia mamlaka ya hiyo ofisi ama resources ya hiyo ofisi kutuchokoza.
Wenye wako na siasa wangojea mpaka 2027, si ndio? Na niwaombe kwa heshima. Niwaombe kwa heshima. MCA wa hapa anajulikana. Sio anajulikana? CMD wa hapa anajulikana? Si gavana anajulikana? Hata president anajulikana? Kupatia watu heshima na kuwapatia nafasi ya kufanya.
Meanwhile, the activity of registering the elderly, children, orphans and those who live with disabilities to the government's Inua Jamii initiative continues in Busia County, while the government makes clear that the arrangements to ensure that those who need these benefits will get their payments on time. Speaking in the Kaliwa Market, Busia County, when inspecting the exercise, the director of the Children's Department in the county, Ms. Esther Wasige, said that the program is intended to empower those who need it and have been suffering. Some of the veterans who have been enrolled have praised the program while mentioning some of the challenges they are faced with.
Tuko na programs tatu katika Inua Jamii. Ya kwanza inaitwa Orphans and Vulnerable Children, na pia tuko na mradi ambao ni wa wazee ambao wako na miaka 70 kwenda juu. na hii ni kila mzee anasajiliwa isipokuwa ule ambaye ako kwa pension, analipwa pension, huyo hawezi sajiliwa, lakini mwingine yeyote ambaye amefikisha miaka 70 kwenda juu anasajiliwa katika huu mradi. Then ya mwisho, programu ya mwisho ni wale ambao wanaishi na ulemavu, wale ambao wako na ulemavu na ni ulemavu ambao unawafanya hawawezi kujisimamia peke yao.
We have advised the members, the beneficiaries, not to be defrauded of their money by persons, maybe even close relatives. But we are going to train them in the coming days also. Secondly, the beneficiaries who will succeed, they will be paid on or before 15 of every month.
Mimi nakuja hapa kwa sababu ya shida ambayo iko nayo. Mimi ni mzee. Nakuja hapa kutafuta pesa ya uzee. Mimi nakaa hakuna mtu mwenye nasaidia. Serikali ukisaidia mimi tafurahi.
Elsewhere, stakeholders in Laikipia County have decried low funding, extreme standards of traditions and customs among some communities and said it is a big obstacle in the war against female genital mutilation. Speaking to the media, the program manager of the Broad Against FGM, Nyerere Kutwa, said that the government was determined to end FGM in the year 2022, but there is still a challenge needed to be addressed by key stakeholders in the sector. On his part, Deputy Commissioner of Laikipia Eastern County, Patrick Muli, said that FGM is marred by secrecy and challenged the chiefs and their assistants to come up with their new methods aimed to fight wrong traditions.
Of FGM in Kenya, as per the KDHS indicators, says that it is actually at 15%. That is for 2022 statistics, which is actually a drop from the 2014 statistics, which was at 21%. So we've been able to drop by 6%. And this one has been because of efforts by all of us, government, county government, national government, stakeholders, civil societies, champions, survivors who've been able to come out and speak openly against FGM, stating that they were cut and they will not wish any other person to go through the cut. So as anti-FGM, we appreciate the efforts of all of us. Despite the fact that we are 15%, we feel that 15% is still on a very high percentage. Our vision is to have zero tolerance to FGM in Kenya.
Nataka tuone kama tunaweza kuwa na zero tolerance upande wa ukeketaji. Niseme kwamba kama mshirika mkubwa kwa hii mashivu wetu mahali pote wako wamehimizwa kwamba kila jambo wanafanya lazima waongee kuhusu mambo ya ukeketaji ambao serikali imepinga kabisa, na sio serikali peke yake, kwa sababu kuna madhara mingi sana kwa wasichana wakiketwa wakiwa wadogo, kwa umri mdogo. Wengine wanakuwa ni kama wamefunguliwa mlango ya kuozwa. Kwa hivyo ni lazima tupinge.
Now, property of unknown value has been destroyed after a dormitory at Shanderema Boys High School was razed down. According to the witnesses, the fire started at around 5 p.m. while the students were in class. The school principal, Simon Wazenga, says the cause of the fire that gutted down a 70 students capacity dormitory, destroying all their property yet to be known. Wazenga said police have commenced investigations into the matter.
Ambao ulitokea katika dormitory moja katika hii shule. Nataka ni appeal kwa wanafunzi pamoja na the entire school community kuendelea kuwa watulivu, maana kuna investigative agencies ambao wako shuleni saa hizi ambao wanajaribu kuchunguza ili tukaweza kujua chanzo cha hiki moto ilitokana na wapi. Tungetaka kwa appeal kwa wale ambao wahisani ambao wanaweza kitokeza kusaidia wanafunzi ambao wameweza kuathirika. Vitu zao zote, hakuna kitu iliokolewa kutoka katika hiyo dom.
Wanafunzi karibu 68 hawana mahali pa kulala, hawana vitabu. Shule imepoteza vitabu ambao walikuwa navyo, na tunaomba kwamba kwa sababu ni muhula wa mitihani warudi kwa vitabu wakati mipango inaendelea kufanywa ili matokeo ya shule yawe mazuri. Kwa wakati hatuwezi kujua sana, tunaachia wale wataalamu ambao wako wa Kenya Power na DCI wafanye uchunguzi ili tujue kabisa ni nini kilisababisha.
Pamoja hata na Wizara ya Elimu ikiongozwa na Waziri Ezekiel Machogu, muingilie kati, tunaomba usaidizi wenu, mkuje msaidie hii shule yetu ya Shandarema.
Now remember, the Africa Climate Summit just got into its second day earlier today. We've seen delegates from a number of countries within the continent, that is Africa, gathering at the KICC right in Nairobi to discuss matters climate change and where next for African countries. Of course, one of the things that has been discussed at length is enabling Africa to have renewable energy, towards the goal of the Africa Climate Summit. Of course, remember the COP28 is set to be held in December later on this year. And we have the summit currently ongoing at the KICC. So how about we cross over where the summit is currently ongoing?
Dear brother, His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Excellency Mr. Faki Mahamat, the Chairperson of the African Union, Excellency, Heads of State, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking the government and people of Kenya under the leadership of His Excellency President William Ruto for the wisdom of hosting this very important event and granting me the honor of moderating this high-level panel. The key message of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord was that no country should have to choose between fighting poverty and fighting for the planet. The Paris Summit identified a critical role finance will play in ensuring this. Extensive commitments on climate financing were made there. 8 years since Paris, Africa and many developing countries have no resources to fight neither poverty nor the climate challenges that we face every day. The problem, though, hasn't been a deficit of ideas and suggestions, but rather the lack of action on the part of almost all stakeholders. Whether it is the pledge of G7 leaders to commit $100 billion climate finance, or the Bristol Initiative calling for international lenders and multilateral development banks to become more adaptive and innovative in structuring loans and debt servicing for countries affected by climate disasters, or caused by developing economies for the reform of the G20 common framework to give voice to the global south. The challenge remains the difficulty of moving from words to action. It is estimated that Africa will require about $200 billion per annum to achieve SDGs by 2030. Another $160 billion will be required for African countries to pursue loss and damage mitigation and adaptation, implying a combined annual cost of pursuing a climate-efficient development of over $350 billion. When you add the money needed for infrastructure of over $100 billion, you can begin to imagine the level of financing that is required. And the question had always been, who will bear the cut? Who will fund the gargantuan cost? We find ourselves in quite a unique situation today. A situation where the economies that are responsible for the most emissions in a cumulative and static sense are also the wealthiest. That scenario makes it easier to apply the principle of burden sharing that recognizes the degree of contributions to emissions and the level of access to resources in the distribution of responsibilities. Therefore, we must call on developed economies and G20 economies in general to honor their commitments to developing nations towards climate finance. Nonetheless, in the absence of firm global action, Africa has not been sitting on its palms, especially because it is the continent that suffers the most from the loss and damage inflicted by climate. It is the continent that needs to adapt to the changes we are beginning to see. So things are being done, even at a very small scale. For instance, Afreximbank and Africa Risk Capacity have jointly created an insurance product that protects African economies from food insecurity that arises from climate disaster risks. Afreximbank finances the premium and provides food import finance and co-guarantee to Africa Risk Capacity, while Africa Risk Capacity fronts the provision of the insurance capacity. Funding at just $1 billion for this product, you will agree with me that this is grossly underfunded. There is therefore a scope for the World Bank, the multilateral development banks in general, capital-rich economies to step in by providing capital to this fund as a way of meeting their loss and damage obligations. A global carbon tax, which His Excellency President Ruto emphasized on today, can also be a major source of funding for the climate insurance program. Money from that can be used to subsidize the insurance that countries may pay to buy this climate disaster insurance. Afreximbank has also launched a $2 billion climate adaptation facility, a product we co-conceived with the government of Kenya under President Ruto. And this product provides facilities that makes it possible for countries to engage in adaptation projects in a way that does not lead to additional sovereign debt, leveraging public-private partnerships. The first transactions will be done here in Kenya, and we expect to replicate those transactions in the Sahel and other parts of the continent. While these are tangible proposals and initiatives, political leadership and collective will are paramount to breaking the course of further development and fighting climate disaster. This high-level panel of key leaders will aim to provide the political guidance needed as we prepare to make an even stronger case at the upcoming COP28 in the United Arab Emirates later this year. I'm sure that our distinguished panelists will bring greater illumination to these issues and more. In this context, it is my singular honor to now welcome our esteemed panelists. Let me begin by inviting our host, His Excellency President William Ruto, to please come up to the podium to take his seat. His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, President of the Republic of Ghana. His Excellency Mustafa Madbouli, Prime Minister of Egypt. Her Excellency Francia Marquez, Vice President of Colombia. His Excellency Dr. Sultan Jebba, COP28 President and Honorable Minister of the UAE, His Excellency Sigrid Kaag, Deputy Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Sorry, Her Excellency. Thank you again, and on your behalf, let me welcome our panelists once more. Since this morning, we've had quite extensive discussions and presentations on ideas about what to do to make sure that we move from discussion to action, especially with regard to climate finance. So let me begin by asking host, President Ruto, what he should consider to be the key elements of global climate finance architecture that we should all be aiming at, especially when we get to UAE for COP28.
Thank you very much, Professor Orama. As I said this morning, how do we move from potential to opportunity? And how do we turn the opportunities we have into jobs, into investments, and into industrialization, manufacturing, and growth? That's really what we need to do. And front and center is the big elephant. Where is the money going to come from? How are we going to finance our transition from opportunity to growth? In my opinion, there are three areas that we need to focus. Number one, we need to focus on where do we find money or resources or financing, number one, at scale, and number two, that is affordable, and number three, that is accessible. And that is why we have insisted that while we appreciate the contribution of our multilateral development institutions, the current financial architecture to support our progress, what they are doing is good, but it is insufficient because our current challenges are compounded. We're not dealing with a normal situation. We're not dealing with the situation for which these institutions were built. And therefore, it is important for us to realign our sources of financing with the realities of the moment. The moment we need a scale-up of development resources. And that is why we are speaking about scale. At the moment, we need to make sure that these resources are available at rates that are friendly to the investments we want to make. And therefore, in my very honest opinion, the reform of the multilateral development banks will achieve two things. And when we talk about reform of multilateral development banks. Some of those banks, whether it is IMF or World Bank, we are shareholders. So legitimately, these are our institutions, and therefore we need to deal with how do we make these institutions of ours much more fit for purpose? How do we make them fit for purpose? So, number one, we think like we did with COVID, when there was some creativity and innovation that resulted in special drawing rights. We think that there is scope in that window of special drawing rights to meet the challenges that we have of the moment of energy transition. What we would want done differently this time is that the manner in which these resources are allocated should be different, where those who need it most get it, while those who need it least don't have to get a lion's share of what they don't need. That's number one. Number two, we believe also creatively and in an innovative manner, there is scope for us to use and leverage the balance sheets of these institutions. And I must do a disclaimer, I am not a financial person, I am a scientist. But I am very confident that we have very intelligent people. We are not short of good economists and analysts and financial people who can imagine that space and tell us what is it that we can do to leverage the balance sheets of these great institutions. And that is what my sister Motley is talking about, the Bridgetown Initiative. How do we raise an extra $500 billion every year, or at least in 5 years, to be able to do what we must do with energy transition? And finally, I think the other option that we need to have a conversation about is carbon tax. This is a very controversial thing, but it is the right thing to have the conversation about. However controversial it may be, I mean, we need to have a conversation about carbon tax. If we are to raise the scale of resources needed for energy transition, we must have a conversation about carbon tax. In fact, the numbers speak to it. The IMF has actually done a lot of work around it. And they have told us it is possible to raise 870 billion shillings from carbon tax. The only problem that IMF is pointing to us is that there is insufficient political will. And there are challenges with political will. Surely, faced with an existential threat to humanity, aren't we able to muster the political will to achieve this? And let me give one more thought around it. The EU Parliament has already considered FTT, the financial transaction tax, as a means of raising resources to deal with climate change. And in fact, they've gone all the way to their parliament. So the idea of a carbon tax is no longer remote. We must have it firmly on the table. And finally, Professor, we are making these suggestions because we are practical. We are dealing with practical situations. As I said this morning, 9 countries have already gone off the cliff. Many are on the way there to debt distress because of high interest rates and because of climate change. Unless we deal with it, and let us not imagine that we are sorted, especially because when we were in Paris, admittedly, there were found ways of dealing with countries that have been already in default. But the question we ask ourselves, do we have to wait until countries have gone to default to sort them out? Isn't it possible for us to sort them out ahead of the cliff? And that is the conversation we are having. And let me conclude by saying that this time round, we're going to be firmly on the table. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable this conversation is. It doesn't matter who we annoy. We are going to be here until we are heard and until the right thing happens.
No, thank you very much. Let me go to Chairperson Musa Faki. Chairperson, you just heard what President Ruto said. As we form the views as a continental view, from the African Union's perspective, what should we be expecting? What is the African Union's views and strategy to make sure that all these ideas that we are forming here find their way into implementable actions when the COP28 convenes? Thank you.
Merci, professeur Orama. J'ai écouté effectivement attentivement le président Ruto.
President Ruto.
Et je l'en remercie.
And I thank him.
Je le remercie pour son plaidoyer fort.
I thank him for his strong advocacy, his leadership,
mais aussi et surtout
but also and particularly for the concrete proposals that he has put on the table.
La situation de l'Afrique est connue.
The situation of Africa is well known. The challenges faced by the continent are known.
Les attentes qu'il nourrit
And the expectations that are nurtured are known. Its important potential also is known. The promises made to Africa are also known. There is a lot of literature on this matter. Now, what should we do? This is the question. First, we have to accept the specific nature of the continent. 600 million Africans don't even have electricity. It is a continent which is under-industrialized, and then is being asked here and now to bring about the ecological transition. President Macky Sall earlier was saying that we need to follow the rhythm and peculiarity of this continent. All this can be possible. Transition, yes, it is important, but we need to establish the necessary conditions for it to become possible. Africa is not coming empty-handed. It is a reservoir. So I think we need to think of that, how this important potential may be harnessed for the benefit of its peoples. This is a substantive issue. The promises that have been made, including the reform of international financial institutions, and what we have seen in the past, the structural adjustment programs, which for decades had been applied by the African states. And I recall, I'm talking of Chad, my country, we were asked even that certain agricultural productivity, particularly rice, they should stop production and import rice. It did not work. We have to admit that. It did not work. Then we went to programs of the World Bank, poverty reduction. What is the result? Let's take stock. Some countries are now even poorer. And I do not exclude, and I am not condoning poor governance, and I am not excluding the responsibilities of the states, but the special drawing rights. There was some hope. Out of 650 million, we got only, and I'm really asking whether this was disbursed, 33 million or 33 billion. After a terrible pandemic like COVID, can we really have economic recovery? It is not possible. The Green Fund, we have been told about it. All this within a context of debt servicing, and then the situation of countries that are appreciated, which are some countries that are considered arid. I'm not a pessimist, and by the profession, my training, my nature cannot be pessimist. That is why we expect, and from this important conference, and it is very timely, so that around the table with our partners, with the financial institutions, with international organizations and the member states, since the challenge of climate change does not forgive anybody, does not distinguish between African, American or Indian. I think we are all in the same boat. Let us make sure that this boat doesn't sink. That is the real problem. I'm not a technical expert to go into the various labyrinth of how to market carbon, etc. and all. I think we cannot be just content with promises. Those that have been promises made have never been fulfilled, have never been honored. Let us ask ourselves the real question, and honestly, whether politically we have decided this time to be serious and to be consistent. And thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think with the kind of enthusiasm we've seen here, the passion and the commitments shown by our leaders, I believe that Africans have had enough. I think everybody now wants to see action because we've used many years to think and talk about what can be done. It is what will be done. With that, let me invite our brother Mo Ibrahim to join the panel. Mo. Yes. No, thank you for joining us. So, and let me ask Prime Minister Madbuli, given the challenges many countries face today, the financing challenges, interest rates, debt overhang, and of course the large financial requirement for meeting the climate finance requirements at country level and continental level and so on. What would be your suggestion on the best approach? President Afwerki mentioned we should look inwards, we shouldn't look outside. Many said we should look outside. So there are different views. The important thing is we need the money. So from your perspective, what would be the suggestion on how to find the money? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me start by stating that climate finance is undeniably the central pillar for empowering the delivery of climate goals and nationally determined contribution, or NDCs, in particular for our African continent. In this regard, allow me to summarize Egypt's vision in this respect as follows. First, climate finance constitutes the cornerstone and foundation for the full implementation of national commitments and contribution as outlined by developing countries, and to the transition to a green economy and addressing climate change issues. International agreements, including the UN FCCC and Paris Agreement, clearly established a direct link between the level of financing provided to developing countries to support their efforts and the level of ambition and national actions. And needless to mention that this does not imply any backsliding from exerting maximum efforts nationally to deliver on ambitious commitment and NDCs, but rather underscores that financing should serve as a key driver and enabler to complement national resources with a clear goal of swift and effective implementation. Secondly, it is essential to deal with the staggering funding gap with a realistic approach and build upon current estimates to enable the implementation of the commitment declared by developing countries, which amount to around $5.6 trillion by 2030. The required investment in renewable energy alone is approximately $1 trillion annually. Likewise, the amount of international funding needed to achieve carbon neutrality amounts to about $4 trillion annually. These are the estimates required to implement the scientific recommendation to maintain the 1.5-degree target. Thirdly, this volume of financing underscores the need for a significant overhaul of international financial institutions and multilateral developing banks in alignment with the objective laid out in Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan. This restructuring should be driven by three core goals: additionality, through increasing climate financing levels without impacting the funding already designated for sustainable development and poverty eradication; accessibility, through facilitating access to climate finance by developing countries without stringent conditions and other obstacles; and right finance instruments, through offering concessional financing instruments and removing, as His Excellency President Ruto mentioned, and removing the unfair and unbalanced rate posed on developing and African countries, including the surcharge imposed by some multilateral development banks. Such a reform should also consider the constraints posed on by debt, limited resources for adaptation efforts, the escalating cost of financing due to the interest rate surges, and the collateral requirements to entice global investment. In a sense, this approach aims to prevent the deepening of the debt crisis in the developing world and the African continent. Fourthly, there is a need to transform the challenges of debt into an opportunity for innovative financing mechanism. This includes effective mechanism for debt for climate swap, redirecting financing towards developmental and environmental projects, as well as a review of international financial institutions' policies regarding restrictions and fees on loans to developing countries. In this context, we welcome the Bridgetown initiative as a step forward in facilitating financing for developing countries facing the impact of climate change. I would like further highlight Egypt initiatives in partnership with the Economic Commission of Africa on Sustainable Debt Coalition endorsed by African Ministers of Finance, which aim at decreasing the cost of green financing. Those initiatives contribute to the reform of the international financial architecture. We already have the support of more than 22 African countries for the Sustainable Debt Coalition and call for all African countries to join these initiatives. Lastly, it is crucial to explore innovative financing tools, including carbon market and certain fees or taxes on specific activities and economic sectors. But in doing so, and in considering such innovative sources, we need to ensure that they are in line with the international agreements and fully considering its socio-economic implications, particularly on our developing countries. At the same time, ensuring that we are refraining from any unilateral actions that might hinder the competitiveness of our African exports or our ability to attract foreign direct investments. I would like, at the end, to state that Egypt firmly believes that raising the level of ambition in the new NDCs without a corresponding increase in appropriate financing and a review of current financing mechanism will not contribute to achieving the desired goal, whether in energy transition, emissions reduction, or adaptation. It is imperative that we witness a clear shift in the policies of multilateral financial institutions and development partners in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Excellency, for that. And I think you just sent a message inviting all African countries who have not yet joined the coalition to do so. There are 22 already. I think the invitation is for the rest, 33 countries to consider joining so that we can have one voice in pushing this. So thank you. Let me go to the Deputy Prime Minister, Kag. You've heard from African leaders about their expectations, what they want from the discussions that have been ongoing on financing climate. You looking from outside to inside, what is your take on that, on what they've said? What would you suggest, and what do you think the developing economies or developed economies can do to support the initiatives that have been proposed? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for President Ruto for this fantastic initiative. Actually, I don't think there are any sides. There are just different shades of the same coin and different potential affordability and accessibility. But there's one side, and that's the climate action and the urgency. Because we are one humanity, and we will all perish together, some sooner than later. But this is the stark reality. So I think from that vantage point, we've heard a lot also in recent years. We know what success looks like. The big question remains political leadership, political will. And this is where differentiation lies in, because some countries will have to do more and others will have to do less. And some might lie in between. Let me just detail this. We know we need to stand for climate justice, and this needs to be detailed in a more meaningful way so that it makes sense to all, that also general audiences in Western Europe or OECD countries actually figure this out from a relative vantage of an advanced economy. We need to consider equity and urgency. Now, I'm very seized with the notion of opportunity because I think it's very big, it's equally important, and it's the only way we can drive this agenda away from being only an existentialist crisis and to keep people along with this flow. Now, the how, that's the what. The how is straightforward, technical support, but it differs per country. It can be high-level technical support, but it needs to be quick, it needs to be available, and it needs to be affordable. And very often it's still costed by the countries themselves. Here, we need to fix that. Equally so, I think we've lost a lot of time in focusing too much in a lot of agendas on mitigation as opposed to adaptation. We now know both need to happen, but we need to make up for lost time. When it comes to finance, of course, very often the elephant in the room. I've been a Minister for Trade and Aid. I've worked a long time for the UN. The best ideas fall foul of lack of political will or affordability and finance. the substance most can agree to. Now, on the MDBs, we really think as shareholders and as partners in this endeavor, the reforms, the capital adequacy framework reforms need to happen now. There's an institutional burden of proof and leadership at the MDBs, as well as the IFIs, as well as the shareholders. I think President Ritu said that as well. We're all in this. We own part of it. We need to make this happen. We also see potential in differentiated pricing, in hybrid capital. It's only a pilot, but let's make the pilots work and scale them up. Too much time is lost in talking about pilots that remain standalone pilots. Secondly, private sector. I've heard a lot in recent years on how the private sector is willing, and I'm fully convinced, yet they need very often the right governance framework, they need to know which partnership they are part of, and they need scalable and callable projects where governments, such as mine, can guarantee the risks. The onus should not be on the developing or highly indebted country to also guarantee the risk. This is where I think we sometimes fail to connect the dots. Now, last but not least, governments. We need to really make serious business out of onward lending of the SDRs. We also need to increase the SDRs. We need to provide the additional finance. Now, as a Minister of Finance, of course, my other hat, I'll tell you, this is not a very popular theme. Everybody nods, yes, very important. No, we agree with Mrs. Kaag. But then it's either cost-cutting or it's increase of taxation or other means of financial availability. And this is where domestic audiences suddenly become reticent. This is where political will comes in, to make this a shared agenda for all of us. It's not easy, it can be done. We actually won elections on this ticket in the Netherlands last time round. I don't think we'll do as well this time, but still, it can be done. Innovation, an obvious one. Blended finance mentioned. Green bonds. We were the first AAA rated country that issued green bonds. We can assist other countries, but we also need to find ways for many of the developing countries to issue their own green bonds to also provide for the domestic resource mobilization that needs to happen as part of accountability. The sensitive topic of loss and damage, I look forward to the discussion at the COP28 because I think there's a fair claim that has been put forward. Now the negotiations will see how far we'll go. I think the political symbolism of the discussion is equally important if we talk about equity and a shared agenda. Now, last but not least, carbon tax and carbon pricing. Very, very important. Unless you price it, unless you tax it, it often has little meaning. The only way to change behavior, productivity, the way we produce and consume, particularly at the large emitting countries, is if we price it more and we make that part of a global public good. But that's part of a discussion. Last but not least, together with my friend and colleague, Minister of Finance of Indonesia, I co-chair the Global Coalition of Ministers of Finance for Climate Action. So a 1-second pitch, all Ministers of Finance, if not in the room, join this coalition. Make your budgets work for climate action. This is where the duty and opportunity of care lies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the illuminating comments. I see there is no actually night and day between what the African leaders are saying and what you've said. Let me now go to Francia, the Vice President. From Colombia, from Meru, and then exported to Colombia. We share the same heritage, and incidentally, the same problems. We understand ourselves. We understand the burden we are carrying. We understand the challenges the climate has posed on us. So, looking from where you are inside and listening to our leaders and also the Prime Minister from the Netherlands, what would be your suggestion, especially from your experience in Latin America and the Caribbean? Thank you.
Thank you. In the first place, I must say that Latin America and the Caribbean are experiencing the pressures of powerful economies that want to continue exploiting our natural resources. And this pressure of exploiting our natural resources contribute to increasing the climate crisis. There are very few the governments who are taking up the decarbonized economy, an economy that makes a transition and a transformation in this matter. Obviously, in low-income countries, the vulnerable countries, or the middle-income countries like the Latin American countries, this is a great challenge because we have based our economy on extraction. We have based our economy on carbon, to coal. In my country, we are the first alternative government, and we are creating a change in the laws and also a change of paradigms, in social paradigms, because we have to create awareness that contributing to the exploitation that accumulates capital but does not generate well-being and that destroys the ecosystem is not a path that we accept. In this sense, we want to make a transition, and as I had said before, we have serious problems, serious financial problems, which in some way do not allow us to resolve the challenges of the effects of the climatic crisis. But in the case of Colombia, we have a conflict, a social conflict, an armed conflict, a war which we are experiencing, which contributes to increase, exacerbate this situation of vulnerability in our country. And in this sense, I think that we have an increase of the debts with very high interest rates that do not allow that within our country we can have the necessary resources to invest in these proposals for energy transition and actions for mitigation and adaptation to the climate change. This will not change if we continue with the current financial system, as I have said, which has a colonialist point of view. The financial system, the international financial system that we have today, is one that does not allow justice, social justice, and neither does it allow for climatic justice. In our countries, the basic needs are not satisfied. So, and there are lots of needs. We are one of the countries where there are the most inequalities in the planet. Sometimes we have to not invest socially in drinking water, in health, in electricity and connectivity in order to use these resources from the treasury to pay the external debts, which, as I was telling you, has very high interest rates with respect to countries which do not have the same conditions that we have. In this sense, we have spoken about exchange of debt for climate action with new rules, not the same traditional rules, because this problem, which is not a traditional way of carrying out things, we have to innovate with new actions, new rules. The financial system today does not help us to face the challenges of climate change. It's not a system that was created for us, and it's not a just system for our countries. And in this sense, we have come to present a multilateral agreement because this is already a global crisis that requires a global response. And that means that as we had done during the pandemic, we can do, or maybe in this multilateral agreement, we can do what was done during the pandemic to issue special rights that can allow the vulnerable countries and the middle-income countries to generate conditions of flexibility in regard to their debts and to free resources to invest in our lands, in our communities, in our nations. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to care for this situation. This is a proposal which President Gustavo Petro has presented to the world, and we agree with President Ruto about the need to reform the financial system, the qualifiers of debt, increase the crisis, because in a catastrophic situation of our country, the risk rating makes it more difficult to access to credit, which allows us to finance these programs. Therefore, we are in a situation of inequality and which has some effects that are higher than those of other countries that are in better economic conditions. And this implies that we have to think that Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa should unite with one voice and to present in a very specific way what we have been doing to reform the financial system so that our countries we can access to better conditions of social and climatic justice.
Thank you very much, Vice President Francia, for those comments and insights. Let me now go to Abuda Mo. Mo, I will call you a private sector person, a businessman, and a philanthropist. So you straddle all. So you have been campaigning for good governance, campaigning for climate justice, and so on. As we gather here to have a common view, a common position for Africa as we prepare to go to COP28, and having listened to everybody here, from your perspective as a philanthropist, as a businessman, what would you like to add? Or what do you think we should not take with us to the world? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. I really have 4 points to make. And the first one really is there is a silver bullet to solve this problem. And we are just like dodging all that to talk about, how we can get more money for climate finance. Just tax carbon. Use the market. You guys in the rich countries taught us about, you invented capitalism, invented market. Why aren't you applying market forces to carbon? Why? And that is the question, because the problem now is that people make promises. Those poor guys in Africa and somewhere else, they have a problem there. Okay, well, we are kind people, we're going to offer them some money. How about $100 billion for climate fight? But then, actually, things are tight. Sorry, we cannot make it this year. Well, in those guys' mind, it's charity. It's charity. And that's a mistake. It should not be charity. This should be an international clear agreement. You break it, you own it. That is the honest answer. Without changing the market dynamic, will not change. Now, every American man, woman, child emits 17 tons every year. Every European, 6.5 to 7 tons a year. China, same. Now, the question here, excuse me, who gave you the right to use all this amount of carbon? We are 8 billion people in this planet. Science tells us we cannot emit more than 24 billion tons a year. That's 3 tons per head. 3 tons per head. Who gave the Americans the right to do 17? Who gave the Europeans the right to do 7? Why? You pay for it. If you pay for it, then you change. Then you cannot change behavior unless you pay for it. The only problem is that we have very few statesmen. We have many politicians, very few statesmen. President Juncker, who is the president of the European Union a few years ago, said something very beautiful, actually. He said, you know what? All of us politicians, we know what to do. But we don't know how to get elected if we do it. And that is a problem. That is a problem. We have a lot of politicians who want to be elected, but nothing will happen then. So nothing happens. So we must fight for carbon tax. I love what the Deputy Prime Minister said about that. And the first time I hear a senior European politician say that. Look, soon there's going to be a seat available for the Prime Minister in your country. I hope you get it. Anyway, because that's honorable of you to say that. Those guys are in denial. Who puts all this carbon up there? Who put it up? Own it. You need to own what you break something, you do it. That's the first point. Without carbon tax, everything else is charity. It doesn't work. That's one thing. Second thing, we talk about investments in Africa and green investment. We have been talking about investment in Africa for ages, but nobody invests in Africa. Tricky. Simple reason, it is impossible to invest in Africa. If all this rating agency rate you guys as junk, you are sub-grade investment. Who's going to invest here? Most of the money out there, private money, is in pension funds, insurance companies. By law, they cannot invest here. By law. If I'm running an insurance company and I want to put $1 billion, and a lot of those people are nice people, they want to invest in Africa, but they say, look, if I invest $1 billion, I have to put another $1 billion here as a security, because I'm sorry, but you are sub-grade. You are not investable grade for me. This system is broken. It has to be sorted out. And this rating agency, they all have one office in South Africa, as if South Africa is Africa, 54 countries. They sit in South Africa and pontificate about all of Africa. Again, those guys act as auditors, and guess what? They sell consultancy for African countries about how to improve their grade. Excuse me? This is a clear conflict of interest. You cannot grade people and you go and say, I offer you consultancy how to improve your grade. Excuse me? People go to prison for that. Anyway, so that is something about the rating agency. It has to be sorted out. Then we come to this multinational. I'm amazed about the lack of governance. in the World Bank and the IMF. And I told Ajay and Kristalina the other day, we were all in Paris for a meeting. I said, you guys, if you were running or your banks are listed in any decent stock exchange, you will have been delisted because your governance sucks. Can you have a listed company? Can you have any bank in the world without senior independent directors? Where are the independent directors in the World Bank? None. It's the shareholders who, major shareholders, hug it. Where is the independent directors? Where is the voice of the other countries? Fine, major shareholders keep 60%, 70% of the shares. Fine, but let some fresh air in the room. Get some independent directors in the room. Otherwise, your governance sucks. You'll be delisted. Something else gross really happening in this institution. Do you know that this is the only banks in the world where the board sits in the headquarters? They sit in the headquarters with their staff. And I asked Ajay, how you run your business? You are the president of this institution and you have this board and their staff living on top of you, running around, telling the staff what to do, lobbying for their countries, whatever interest. No, don't give loan to this guy. Hey, you must give that. What is this? This is breach of basics of good governance. Do you know how much it costs the World Bank to keep those guys in residence? Every year it is over $100 million. Do you know that? $100 million to house the board and their staff every year. Excuse me, what is the job of the World Bank? To eradicate poverty? $100 million every year would have educated 1 million kids in Egypt every year. Why those guys sit there spending $100 million? This is the issue of governance. It has to be addressed. I stop here.
Well, thank you very much for bringing the private sector angle, the market angle to the discussion. But the good thing is that it somehow aligns with the suggestions that have all come here. What I get from that, because it helps me to summarize, is that the carbon tax is an agenda that must be taken from here to COP28. And I also agree with it as a banker because you are right. You use tax and subsidies to make sure that you direct certain actions where you want them to go. So I think that's one of the things. And there's also a consensus on reforming the international financial architecture. I don't want to call it architecture. The way the international financial system operates. And that's not just a multilateral. You touched on even the rating agencies. People can also talk about how the stock exchanges operate, if you want to extend it to all those. So I think a comprehensive approach to it is important. And as I agree, that the part of the problem is that the negotiations we have is David and Goliath negotiation. Incidentally, the person we should be telling to do more is the Goliath. And the others are the Lilliput, who really should be treated more fairly. But your voice can't rise to that level. But by coming together as Africans, coming together with the Caribbean, Latin America, and having politicians like the Deputy Prime Minister, I think we can start forming a consensus, which started last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. For the first time, loss and damage came on the table. It means some progress is being made. It's a common problem for everybody. and we must make sure we all work together, rich and poor, those who emit and those who don't emit, to make sure we solve it. So thank you. I would invite, I think, President Ruto to say the last word.
Maybe just three things. I want to agree with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance that in this debate, there are no sides. We're on the same side. And we need to begin to drive this from the same side, because the risk that we face when this place burns, it will burn with everybody. The emitters and the non-emitters, the people from the south and the people from the north. That is settled. And because of that, we need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. We need to listen very carefully to what Mo Ibrahim is saying. Whether it is carbon tax, and then I believe that that conversation is overdue. If we will not be having a conversation about carbon tax in COP27, and not just that conversation, on the mechanism of the how, and with a proper timeline, then we will not have a meaningful conversation. Number two is the conversation around rating agencies. Credit rating agencies are destroying our economies. We have to be honest with them. Their algorithm is faulty. They are not using empirical science. And I'm saying this as a scientist myself. There is a problem, a big problem with credit rating agencies. And in some instances, they are conflicted. And there must be a candid conversation about their data, their findings, and whether they are doing the right thing. And finally, is to say, as Africa, we will be putting together the Nairobi Declaration that is going to be candid, bold, and practical for us to carry that conversation into the UN General Assembly and into COP28.
We are all on the same side. If we burn, everyone burns. His Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, thank you so much for that conversation, wonderfully hosted by Professor Benedict Orama. Thanks everyone for a great discussion. And to Mo Ibrahim, if you break it, you own it. And reminding us too that there actually is a silver bullet, carbon tax, which His Excellency President Ruto said really has to be on the agenda at COP, regardless of whether it's a David and Goliath negotiation. Today, government leaders have been gathering here to discuss a vision for a greener future. A private sector declaration was signed under the leadership of Equity Group and Dr. James Mwangi, together with international collaborators such as the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, the East African Business Council, and the Africa Business Leaders Coalition of the UN Global Compact, among others. This declaration in support of government is a commitment to combating climate change by the private sector, which acknowledges the importance of coordination between the public and private sectors to achieve the shared goal of climate action for resilience and green growth. Alongside the Nairobi Declaration, this private sector statement will be heard during the upcoming United Nations General Assembly, the World Bank, IMF, Marrakesh meetings, and at COP28 as the private sector voice of Africa, offering its own commitment to responsible solutions related to climate change. I'd like now to introduce Dr. James Mwangi, Group MD and CEO of Equity Group Holdings, for more to discuss on the global finance architecture and the private sector's point of view. Please, everyone, a very warm applause and welcome to Dr. James Mwangi.
Hey, bana ba Kenya na mugeza ndi mulembe. Mulembe ndi. Waya mumbe kama rumweza.
Thank you very much for a great day. I commend all of you for your patience. I assure you, Your Excellency, President Ruto, that we have heard you, and we want now to give the multilateral development banks an opportunity to respond. We want to give the global financial experts an opportunity. They have been in the room, they have heard what has been said, and hopefully they can give us their way forward to the issues that has been raised by the African leaders and the private sector. Without much ado, I want to invite Dr. Akiumi Adesina. If Adesina, you are present. Quickly, Honorable Silusua, Minister of State for Development, Francophonia and International Partnerships. Honorable Babel Kolfa, Parliamentary State Secretary, German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Alexia Tutor, Assistant Secretary of International Trade and Development, U.S. Secretary, U.S. Treasury. Body Deputy Managing Director, International Monetary Fund. And last but not least, Axel Van, Senior Managing Director, World Bank. Thank you very much for leader being patient this afternoon. It was really great listening to the African leaders on the issues of finance. It's apparent that the big elephant in the room is finance. And it appears that the ball has been pushed to the court of the multilateral development banks and international financial institutions. I seem here to have truly the shareholders, if I may say, of those institutions, the policy decision makers. And we want to give them a chance, maybe to respond to the issues the African leaders are raising, to respond to the issues that the private sector, Mo Ibrahim, has articulated the issues of the private sector. And broadly, if I may summarize so that we have a common understanding of the issues that has been raised, there is the issue of accessibility of finance and speed to which disbursements are made. There is a big issue of affordability, at what cost. His Excellency President Ruto said Africa pays at least 5 times. And the rationale there has been questioned because it's not an African risk. It's a global climate risk that we are talking about. And it has been said, if the world bans, we all ban on it. So it's not a country risk that we are financing. It's a climate risk. So when it comes to that issue, and there is also the question of how much is being availed. And those 3 issues seems to be really at the center of concern of the African leaders. And so we could be able to address ourselves to those issues. But there is also a question of our institutions failing to connect the dots in the way they respond, and particularly to the issue of risk. This issue, and eventually it boils down to the question of equity, fairness, justice, and equality in the world. And so it is in that light that we will be responding to the issues that we have. So without much ado, I've been told the IMF Deputy Managing Director may be catching a flight, so I will ask fellow panelists, maybe if we could give him a chance. And the question maybe to Bo Lee is, how can you talk about IMF's role in climate financing? In particular, I know that the FAD has introduced a new tool called the Resilience and Sustainability Trust. We would appreciate hearing an update on that instrument. And finally, what are some of the keys you see to unlocking additional financing for climate adaptation, especially here in Africa?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor first, because I have to go to the airport after this. Good afternoon. It's an honor to join this distinguished panel. I want to speak very briefly on climate finance and the challenges as we see it and how we can help. Climate finance challenges are most acute in Africa, where adaptation needs are much higher, but climate finance flows are too low. Our number shows that about 20% of all flows reach the continent of Africa, but most is geared towards mitigation. But we know adaptation needs are very high. Let me briefly touch on 4 priorities that we think are important to scale up climate finance, including adaptation finance. The first priority, we think, is to increase domestic resource mobilization. That means both public finance and also private finance domestically. International communities can work together to help African countries to build capacity, to broaden tax base, to increase public financing flow. At the same time, international community can also support African countries to build domestic capital markets, to encourage higher private savings and also to support financial sector development. The second priority, we think, is to maximize international support. Grants and concessional financing are very important, and so is equity financing. There is already too much debt in Africa, and we need more grants, concessional financing, and equity. The IMF's new Resilience and Sustainability Trust is providing long-term concessional financing and helping countries with limited room in their budget to invest in long-term resilience, including climate. So far, programs have been approved for 10 countries, half of which are in sub-Saharan Africa. The third priority, we think, given the strained public resources, we need to find ways to crowd in private capital. We see a three-pillar approach to crowd in private capital in scale. The first pillar is to create a policy and regulatory environment that are conducive to private finance. The second priority, we think, is technical assistance and capacity building, such as green public financial management, climate public investment management, and project preparation. IMF and MDB partners, we do a lot of technical assistance to support African countries to improve their capacity in these areas. The third pillar refers to innovative financing solutions and financing arrangement that can promote public-private partnership. The keywords here are de-risking and blending. Public sector, including international partners, need to take more calculated risks if we want to crowd in private capital. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great contribution. Let's turn to Honorable Chrysora. Chrysora, France has commendably played a global leadership role in the conversation on both climate finance and reform of the global financial architecture. A key issue that has emerged in this conversation is the role of the G7 and the G8 in both mitigation and adaptation finance, especially with regard to the realization of pending pledges and commitments. And what is in the progress of on France-led initiatives like the new Global Financing Pact? What do you see as challenges in delivering the new Global Financing Pact and architecture?
Thank you, James, and Excellencies, dear friends. First of all, I'd like to tell you that it's an honor for me also to speak today on behalf of President Macron 2 months after this important rendezvous in Paris. That was the Paris Summit for a new global financial pact, as you said. And so I'd like to thank Kenya and particularly President Ruto for this historic summit. So, as you said, we listen the African friends and African voices. We listened today, but it's for many years that France and the European Union, we listen the voices, the priorities, but also the solutions. So I think you asked me about G7. I'd like to speak about my country. And in European Union, it's the same, but I would like to speak about France because I think we believe in leading by example. And we believe on SDR reallocation and what we did, you know, with 40% of French SDRs reallocated towards vulnerable countries. We deliver on climate finance with 6 billion euros per year for our partners, 23, I see my colleague from Germany, 23 billions European Union, that is, we take our responsibilities. We deliver on debt treatment in the Paris Club and common framework. This is important because we speak about G7, but it's the time to say what we do, each of us. And now, as I said, we make our part, but we see also the global injustice, James. And it is true, as you said, that you have to build now a more inclusive and just international financial system who can fit the challenges of the new century. So you spoke to me about the Paris Summit. It was the beginning, and now we continue here in Nairobi, and all together we hope to arrive to COP28 with some results. In Paris, we achieved some important results. The first results. The first was to put together all of them, G7, countries from G7, from G20, the International Financial Institution, the UN, the small islands, because only together we can build something new. The second is that we have absolutely to restore the trust. If there's no trust, we cannot go forward. And that's why I told you, for the first time, we achieve the targets, 100 billion for SDRs and climate finance, and the debt of Zambia, that was very important. So, last, I'd like to say that we propose also a common roadmap, and this roadmap that we call Paris Pact for People and Planet, it is simple. At the end of the story, no country has to choose, no government has to choose between fighting poverty or fighting for the planet. So it is very important. The second thing that we believe, all of us, because there are 30 countries who signed and we believe this roadmap that we push, it is that each country must be able to define their own strategy. And we have to just to support them. And of course, as you said, also the colleague, they said more money, and not only public money, because we put the public money. How the private sector will come, how we can create this shock. So just to finish, I'd like to say that we see two major issues for this climate summit in Nairobi. The first, that we have to advance the discussion on international taxation. This is very important. The second one, yes, everybody has to participate if we want to save our planet. So tax on fossil fuels, on shipping emission, financial transaction could unlock massive resources. And this is very, very important. And of course, we spoke about the debt. The debt, yes, we cannot cancel the debt. There's not a magic, but it is not acceptable that African countries spend more on debt services than on climate action. So we have to strengthen the things that we have, like the common framework. And this is something that France and many of us, and of course I think the European Union, we believe. And I'd like to say that President Ruto said that global north versus global south narrative is not possible. I would like to say that I disagree. I totally agree with President Ruto, and I don't like this division. There's not global north and global south. There are global leaders and global laggards, and there are both in the north and in the south. So Kenya is definitely a leader. I think France and EU, we are a leader. So thanks, James,
Thank you very much. It's really, we have been brought to a common framework of decision making, irrespective of whether south or north. Thank you very much. Let's come to you, Honorable Barbara Kofa. Germany has been a significant player in the global conversation on climate, finance, and the reform of global financial architecture. What elements do you regard as the most pertinent when it comes to leveraging more climate finance? And what are the biggest challenges in realizing them? Which steps is Germany taking to enhance climate finance?
Well, thank you. There's so many questions. I was just wondering if there's a fifth one coming. But thanks, James, for the questions. And thanks for having me at that conversation here, because I really want to underline what also Chris Fuller was saying. I really like the spirit of this summit, which is a spirit looking for solutions for global challenges and global big problems. And I really want to thank also the Kenyan government for inviting us and for having us and for pushing us forward. That is very important. I think it's crystal clear. Facts are telling us, researchers are telling us, we have to act now. That was the sentence I heard most in that conference. We had all the facts on the table, but we have to act now. So there are, in our opinion in Germany, two layers, I would say, where we have to act. The one is nationally, what we can do nationally on mitigation. I think there is no country in the room who has not room for improvement and becoming better in fulfilling the Paris alignment and really reaching all the national targets in reducing carbon dioxide and equivalents. That is the first challenge, and that's a financial challenge also. But secondly, it's of course about international climate financing on mitigation and on adaptation, so both. One point I would love to say is I think we also have to stop promising at conferences there. We have to deliver. That is coming from the discussion to the action. I'm very glad to hear from my colleague from France about the 6 billion France is fulfilling this year. I'm very happy that we have figures for 22 now, that we fulfilled in 22 in Germany, the 6 billions. We will struggle and we will continue that. Together with private sector engagement, we are about $9.5 billion in that case. So I think that is a good step in the direction of the 100 billion. That is something for proving that we are delivering. So climate finance, I think there are two kind of countries who should invest, and that's of course traditional donors. They have the obligation to do more to fulfill what they promise. I would love also to invite those who are new emittents, who are new large emitters, also to come and contribute their share. I would invite that to do so before COP already on the Green Climate Funding Summit in Bonn in October this year. So we are pledging Germany 2 million there, and I use the opportunity to invite everybody who feels the pressure to come up also with their ideas on financing. So that's the financing part. That's the financing part. But we were talking also, and I heard very well what leaders here in the panel before were saying. It's about international financing architecture as well. It's about the World Bank reform. It's about how to finance global public goods aligned with the traditional necessities, I would say, in financing development needs and financing those who are really suffering and are the poorest. And it has to be done both. And we have to have reforms which are at the end of the day opening this space